Welcome to the Microsoft Cloud Show, episode 59. In this episode, we're going to talk to Jeremy Thake with Microsoft about some Office 365 related developer training opportunities. Recorded live November the 26th, 2014.
Welcome to the Microsoft Cloud Show, the only place to stay up to date on everything going on in the Microsoft Cloud world, including Windows Azure, Office 365, SharePoint, Exchange, Lync, and related technologies. Just the information, no marketing, no BS. I'm Andrew Connell.
And I'm Chris Johnson.
And we're just two dudes telling you how we see it.
Good morning, CJ. How are you doing?
Very well. How are you doing?
Doing absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic today. We've got, this is the middle recording of an episode of a series of 3 episodes that we did, which are interview-based with some people that I spoke to at a recent conference. And this one's going to be a fairly long interview. And so we thought that instead of doing our standard little banter at the beginning, we just dive right into it really, really quick here. So with this episode, this is an interview that I did in Orlando with Jeremy Thake, who is on your team. Does a bunch of developer marketing and training stuff.
Yeah.
And Jeremy and I sat down on November the 20th at the SP Live 360 conference in Orlando. And this was supposed to be a 20 to a 25-minute interview that went for well over 50 minutes.
Gee, what a surprise. You two got talking, huh?
Yeah. And almost all of it was content. It wasn't just, shooting the breeze. How's that?
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah. So instead of going through and doing our standard little banter and stuff like that, going back and forth, CJ and I are just going to say, let's roll the interview. Again, this was with Jeremy Thake from Microsoft. We'll have some links to where you can find Jeremy on Twitter and his blog and such, all up on the show notes for the site. So with that, let's roll the interview. All right, this is Andrew again. I'm sitting here at the SP Live conference in Orlando in the middle of November, where it's nice and warm in typical Orlando fashion, right? I'm sitting here with Jeremy Thake. I just pulled him aside after he just gave a great presentation talking about the Office 365 API. So how you doing, Jeremy?
Yeah, good, mate. I haven't been to Orlando for a while. I'm pretty sure the last time we were here last year was a lot warmer than this.
It was a lot warmer.
I'm literally sitting here in a full leather jacket, ready to go to New York, and like the pool's there, and it looks almost like it's got ice on the top of it.
It's a trip because so my room overlooks the pool, and there's lifeguards that are out there, and no one's out there.
What are they doing?
They're just sitting there. They're not allowed to have their phones or anything. I feel bad for those guys. Like, it's a busy day. I mean, usually a lifeguard usually just sitting there checking people out in the pool, right?
Yeah.
But here it's like there's just doing
nothing there.
Nothing.
But the weird bit is you keep seeing people walking into the pool area. It's like, what are they doing? Like, they're not sunbathing. They're definitely not swimming.
Yeah, there's some people that are going over there like to go read a Kindle or something like that, but nobody's in the freaking water, right?
Yeah.
So, so you came in. Before we kind of get started with this, I know you do a podcast as well.
That's right.
That I've been on, the Office 365 Developer Podcast. It's a Microsoft podcast that you host for them, right?
Yeah. So I started with Microsoft back in March. Prior to that, I was working for an ISV for 3 years in New York called AvePoint, and I've kind of always been in and among the SharePoint developer kind of place, and I've always wanted to work at Microsoft, and this opportunity came up to go and work in the dev team alongside CJ, who's your co-host on the show. Mm-hmm. And it's been great. It's been really good fun. And one thing I said to CJ was, I really think a podcast would be a good thing to do, laser focused on Office 365 development. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I'd listen to your show and the SharePoint Pod show and the Mosh show, and there's a bunch of other shows that are specifically around different areas. But there was nothing that was kind of bridging just Office 365 development. Mm-hmm. And so the benefit I have is being in Redmond is I can kind of corner engineers, not let them out of their office until they get 30 minutes with me where I grill them about whatever topic I want to grill them on. And they've been good with it so far, but I also do MVPs like yourself and a bunch of other guys we've had on the show. So far it's been great. And I think, the traction we've had through it being published on blogs.office.com, and obviously we do all the show notes and stuff on dev.office.com/podcasts, is that, it's a high traffic site. So The audience went from kind of 0 on the first show to I think we're up to about 80,000 unique listeners now a week, which is pretty cool.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's nice too because you get, while there are other shows and while when there's a message that needs to get out, you can always probably tap into one of the shows and say, I'd like to do an interview, we pop it in there.
Yeah.
It's nice to have the Microsoft message too, to be able to control your own channel of how things are going to be said and all that kind of stuff. That's important.
Yeah, and as like, for instance, whether it's on the forums or the Office 365 technical network on Yammer or Stack Overflow or whatnot, if there's questions that come up that we're like, yeah, okay, that's a really curly one, there's obviously a little bit of controversy or maybe it's unclear. Myself and Steve Walker, who's in the CAT team back in Redmond, we get together and we'll have a show. So an example of that would be, there's been a lot of questions around how heavy or how hard do we go on customizing the UI in Office 365, more particular with SharePoint. And we did a show around, the UI tax and that kind of thing. So we kind of try and react to whatever's going on in the community at that time to make it relevant. And so far we've got good feedback from it, so it's been fun.
You got feedback. We have to have a drink now. You said the word. Microsoft guy said feedback, so we got to do
sorry. I'll make sure I get all the buzzwords in. I'll have to get North Star in as well. Here we go.
God.
That'll go in. So CJ in his office has a Stormtrooper China. I don't even know where he got it from. And we were in a meeting and he used the word North Star 5 times in like a half an hour meeting. And afterwards I was like, did you even realize you said this word? He goes, what word? And I said North Star. He goes, no, really? Did I? So we've got this swear jar now, which is every time he says North Star, he has to put $1 in the jar. But it's amazing how many people say it's just the buzzword at Microsoft.
Yeah, it's funny. So, okay, let's roll back just a little bit. I definitely want to talk a little bit about the podcast, but in this episode earlier in the week, I did talk to Sonia Koptev, who is one of your peers. She came down this week. She gave the keynote and talked to her a little bit about stuff that, who she was and everything. So before we kind of really dive into this, can you just take a second and explain, what do you do on for OfficeDev or Office 365? What's your job, and what people look to you and they say, I need to go talk to somebody, what would you say you come to me for that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So our team in general essentially is responsible for all of the messaging around Office 365 development. And when we say Office 365, we do also mean on-premises as well, that's the kind of the brand that we go
365 and SharePoint.
Right. And then it includes Exchange on-prem as well.
Correct, yeah, okay, yeah.
But my particular role when I joined was tackling skilling developers up is one major bucket for me. The other one is helping to transform developers that maybe have been using full trust code in SharePoint or VSTO in Office and wanting to transform over to the new app model. So that's another big theme that I'm kind of go after.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that too and some stuff in a bit.
And then lastly, the kind of the third bucket really is in working with engineering based on my previous expertise and with my community kind of engagement where I used to be an MVP. I'm bridging that gap with the community and making sure that they're heard within engineering with what's going on and making sure we join the dots and organize meetings with them when they're working on things like improving themes, for instance, inside Office 365. Like, who do I know that will be the right people to go and introduce to the engineers to give them feedback on what they're doing? So they're kind of the three kind of top things that I'm working on right now. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of other stuff in and around that, and skilling devs up includes a whole bunch of things, which we'll talk about, I guess, in a little bit. But they're the key 3 things that I'm working on.
Okay, cool. And so, like you said, one thing that you guys have the podcast. I talked to Sonia a little bit earlier. We talked about the dev.office.com and about the stuff around what that site does and user voice and getting feedback from the community and from enterprise and actually getting it back with engineering and how all that stuff gets triaged. I know you talked a little bit about that in your session today.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about the people that have been doing SharePoint for a while, and specifically developers, and they've been doing things with fully trusted code. And a lot of organizations are interested in going to Office 365, or even if they're just staying on-prem, they're interested in moving to this app model. The way I describe it is that people are trying to get from building in and on top of SharePoint and instead building beside and having their stuff, their code not living inside the SharePoint platform, but taking advantage and still doing the same things and doing that using apps. So the challenge that they have is going from fully trusted code solutions over to apps, and how do I achieve the same kinds of things? And so you guys have done, I know that there's a project that's out there with the patterns and practices that people like Steve Walker and Vesa have done. So you want to talk a little bit about like what that is, what the goal of that is, where people can find it, and like the future of what that project's all about?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the challenge is that as a developer, things are always changing, whether you're in the SharePoint land or whether you're in web development land, looking at Angular and the fact 1X has moved to 2.0 and whatnot. And so really I see that transition of where since SharePoint 2007, where we had full trust code, to right now where we announced the app model with SharePoint 2013, there obviously is no way for you to take a full trust code package and deploy that into a multi-tenant Office 365 environment. And so the app model is the only real approach that you can do that. Now, I think where the gap was, and it was hinted at in SharePoint 2010, was get on board with the client-side object model APIs, right? Yeah. And so with sandbox solutions, with the managed code ones, which are deprecated now, and declarative sandbox, you could call those client-side APIs. But unfortunately, I think, and I was definitely one of those people as well, is I stuck where I was comfortable, which was using the server-side object model in SharePoint.
Full trust code.
Yeah, I'd been writing with the server-side object model in full trust code as soon as SharePoint 2007 was released, and I didn't really see the burning need to move to client-side object model.
Right.
And so in 2013, when we improved the API model and we didn't really touch the server-side object model, people were kind of almost forced over to start using CSOM.
Yeah.
And then with the app model, only being able to use the CSOM, it essentially meant that people had to learn that new API and also the new architecture of how the app model is compared to full trust code. And it isn't an easy transition to make without having someone to kind of hold your hand and guide you through it.
Right.
So the Patterns and Practices group, which was originally called Office AMS, the App Model Samples group, essentially is about taking something that was done in a full trust code way, whether it was a SharePoint timer job or an event receiver, and then mapping that to what that would be inside an app model or the app model approach. So with a SharePoint timer job became an Azure worker role with a timer service, essentially. The event receivers that were kind of implicitly triggered through lists and the code was run on the SharePoint server is now a remote event receiver. And how you deploy those event receivers into lists and libraries may not have been obvious from the documentation we put on MSDN, but with a fully fledged sample showing, like F5 this app, and oh look, there's the code that's adding the event receiver, and okay, this is the code that triggers when I change an event in that list or library. So the samples really help developers that are in that learning mode of just kind of grabbing something and configuring it for their environment, F5ing and running it. And that was really the motivation behind PMP. Was we have the Docker, we have all the API endpoints kind of documented, and we have, the instructions to the app model, but the PMP was like kind of really getting in dirty quickly and just grabbing a particular scenario. The really cool bit, and the bit that total credit to Steve Walker and Vesa Juvonen and Bert Janssen and Frank Marasco, and I'm going to forget people, Schumann, Chakrabarty.
I heard someone actually say Vesa's last name because I've never been able to say it correctly.
I probably pronounced it wrong anyway. I always spell it wrong and he tells me off. But I think the key is with those guys is they're working with some of our largest customers out there on SharePoint, and they're helping these customers move from full trust code to the app model because they want to move to Office 365. And so they had these huge customizations in their SharePoint farms on premises, and they wanted to be able to map that across. So where we saw the same patterns in full trust code and this kind of migration over or transformation over to the app model, they started to package these things up. And essentially what happened was that, well, this actually would be great to just put publicly. And that's what PMP is all of the work initially was through working with these customers and building these generic packages of guidance of, this is what you used to do, this is how you do it now, is now published through this PMP. And it's amazing how many of the very common things that come out, whether it's, how you brand for an intranet or site provisioning forms. But, there was 30 customers that they work with, and pretty much all of them had their own custom forms for I need a new site collection or I need a new site. And so that was all done using ASP.NET Web Forms and server-side object model. Whereas what the PMP group did is they built an ASP.NET MVC app that used the client-side object model, and you can go in there and grab that and use it yourself.
Right.
So there was a lot of that where it was kind of like that mapping between it is the old way of doing things and the new way of doing things, essentially.
Gotcha.
And that's grown significantly now that we've open sourced it.
Yeah.
So now the community are submitting back to this stuff. And I think for me, and actually on my show today, this morning, actually with Schumann, we've shipped the core library in PNP now. And we've always kind of done this with extension methods on SP Web, SP List, SP Site.
Right.
You know, like helper classes that really...
The CSOM equivalent of those, right? Yeah.
And so what was happening is all these guys were building these helper methods, but they were throwing them in their own util libraries. We now have this core library, which we actually now shipped with NuGet.org.
Oh, awesome.
So now, if you're running an app model project and you want to use that core library, just go pull it down from NuGet. Our community is like checking in new methods and stuff all the time. We'll update the NuGet package and you'll be able to pull down the new updates. And there's some great stuff in there. Like, it just basically makes things a lot easier to create document libraries with a bunch of parameters, create content types with a bunch of parameters.
Yeah.
All that stuff that might have been like, 10 lines of code to build your object up. You now just throw out a few parameters and the method wraps all that for you.
Do you see that project maybe down the road, potentially like similar to how like the Web Essentials does with Visual Studio, where the next time we see like a major update with the CSOM, maybe some of those extension methods get sucked into the CSOM potentially? Or?
Yeah, I mean, the engineers are taking a good look at it. And what's interesting is there's a lot of times where that PNP internal team have been working with customers where, one example last week, the user profiles properties, you couldn't write to the user profile properties in SharePoint through the CSOM API, the client-side API. You can only do it through the server-side API. And for the notion of moving from FTC to app model,
FTC being fully trusted code.
So FTC full trust code meant that we needed that API endpoint in CSOM.
Right.
And so engineering actually did that. They released it. And so that's out there now.
That's
and
awesome.
So PNP worked very closely with engineering on the gaps between the server-side object model and the client-side object model, and using real-world examples of, well, this customer here has got 200,000 users and they need this API endpoint. So it's pretty high priority, guys. So you've got to get on it. And there's been other examples of setting the alternate CSS and the site logo, which never used to exist. All that was driven by that PNP team. So now that we've opened it up to the community as well, and this core library, I think that will definitely help influence engineering, and it gives engineering more visibility of what's going on out there in real-world scenarios with SharePoint, which is great.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
When it first came out, I mean, I think I've said this before on our podcast. I know I've said it on my blog before, but when I saw that PNP had this big sample that was coming out, I mean, I'll be honest. At first, I rolled my eyes because I've been involved with PNP before, and it's a bunch of academic kind of stuff that it's like, okay, it makes sense. It's good documentation, but it's not stuff so much that is actionable today.
Right.
And it's just like, if I need help to go figure something out, this isn't the same PNP that everything else is. Not PNP from MSDN.
Yeah.
This is stuff that you guys have seen is part. So I want to prompt you for a few things here that make sure that our listeners find out about, but it's not just samples that we have from existing projects that I could take these things right away, hit F5 and actually get something done in my own environment.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But it's also, and so I wouldn't see them so much as samples. It's more like, here are some utilities, right? That's one. Another one is that it is good samples in the sense of, here's a way to do it. You look at it, you might have your own thing that you're building, and this is going to be, you may have some copy paste code that you'd cut from PNP and write into yours.
Oh, and I do it all the time. I mean, because the nice bit is, because it's all in GitHub, you just pull the source down.
Yeah.
So I have it all locally, and I'll just jump in and out of the samples.
Yeah.
I will say though that as you say, like the samples are, and I hate this word, but it seems to be a kind of cool word that's catching on. But it's like they're snacky. They're like they're like very little tiny bits of snack about different bits and pieces, and you can just snack on them as you need them and go for it.
It makes it a little more digestible because you can, here goes the snacking metaphor again. It makes it a little more digestible because if I'm looking to do one thing, it's a sample that does one thing, and it's not doing a lot. But with that being said, you guys don't just have samples, you have full-blown scenarios in there that take a bunch of these different pieces
and
together.
put them together. And that's how the core library came about. So we had the samples, which are the snacky things, and then we have these scenarios and solutions which actually build on a lot of those samples and show an end-to-end solution, essentially.
That's true.
And that's how the core library got built, was because we've got like 5 or 6 solutions in there now, and there was commonality between the solutions, so we pulled it out and abstracted it into this core library.
Gotcha.
And that's how the core library started. But what's interesting is, as well as having this PNP stuff, and you mentioned MSDN, is the MSDN team in Redmond is the content publishing team, or CPub as we call them internally. The content publishing team are actually working with us closely now in the PMP team to actually take what we've done, which is, I guess, it's informal. It's stuff that we decide as a team is the right thing to do. And we do work with engineering. So any samples or scenarios, solutions we put together, engineering do sign off on them. There are some samples that haven't made it through. The engineers have said, no, we don't encourage you doing this. And so we don't ship this sample.
That's key. That's a key point for the listeners to understand, too, is that if you guys ship it, then engineering has said, yeah, we're cool with you doing this.
It's a green tick, yeah. But what the MSDN team are now doing is, because some large orgs are like, well, yeah, the PMP stuff's cute, but it really isn't like official stamp stuff, is the MSDN guys are now building more official documentation, which is more similar to the PMP stuff that we were used to in the 2010 SharePoint days,
right,
where it was... more like I say in a negative way, but the War and Peace document, 100-page Word document, where it was like to the nth degree of explanation of what was going on.
Something a corporation needs to go through and they can use in a meeting.
Right, and where I will say that the PMP stuff is you do need to, really have your head switched on when you pull some of these samples down and be able to read the code. Like there's not too many comments in there.
Yeah.
And so part of the initiative we're doing is the MSDN is like the extreme, which is going to take a lot longer to produce.
Yeah.
But we wanted to get this stuff out there as quickly as we could.
Yeah.
Now the samples, because they are so snacky, are actually really easy to follow. It's F5, there's buttons you click, and there's explanations. Some of the scenarios you've got to dig around a bit to work it out.
Yeah, and they do. I know I've seen that a lot of them do have a README in there where it does kind of explain. Here's how you get it running. Here's what you want to kind of look at and stuff. And,
right.
It's following the model of kind of how the web world is today anyway, where you're just like saying, I'll ship code out there, and you can kind of figure it out. Where a lot of people just throw in documentation is the code for inside and they throw it up in GitHub and stuff. So it makes it easy to find it.
Yeah, and the nice bit is like, so we've got the MSDN guys working on that documentation. There's a bunch already out there, but unfortunately it's a bit hidden. It's on the MSDN downloads section as a zip file, as a bunch of Word documents. So we're working on right now, and I'm sure Sonia mentioned this as the chief of dev.office.com, done a really great job there with dev.office.com and running that on Orchard, and the CMS has just given so much flexibility for us. And we're adding a new section called PMP on dev.office.com.
Very cool.
And so, because the feedback that we got was that with GitHub is that we're up to nearly 100 samples in that folder, and you've got to be
came from me too.
Yeah, you've got a bunch of project names in folders that maybe aren't as intuitive as they could be.
Yeah.
And bless Vessa's heart, but being from Finland, there is a little bit of Finglish in there too. And so
I have some commits to the
I've seen your commits to clean up the Finglish, but Vessa is a really smart guy, and so it's like, keep doing what you're doing.
Absolutely.
But we'll just add a layer of kind of veneer over the top to make it more accessible. So the veneer that we're adding in dev.office.com is essentially you'll hit it, and we'll have a directory that allows you to kind of navigate through to the samples and the scenarios, but in different ways. So GitHub Linear gives you one way, which is a folder structure, a project name. We're going to give you the ability to kind of index, filter by, show me all the apps for SharePoint, or show me all the apps for Office that are at Outlook that are using the workflow in SharePoint.
That'll
just
help.
Different ways to navigate through to the end goal.
That'll help give it some more visibility, I would assume, too, with the search engines, because the search engines will do a better job indexing dev.office.com
than they're going
with GitHub.
Right, but the really cool part is the vendor that we're using with dev.office.com, all the code samples. So if you go to dev.office.com/code-samples right now, where we'd added the samples from GitHub, it actually reads the readme.md out of the GitHub library, and it scrapes the markdown file and loads it into the Orchards page. So we're now getting all the indexing of all the page content directly in dev.office.com in a more discoverable way. And so we're going to do exactly the same thing with PMP, which is great.
That's cool.
So that's like the next step, which we're like actively working on link calls right now with Vessa and Steve and the team. So I think that will help with the discovery, and obviously the MSDN documentation as well will help with more of that rubber stamp of approval, the more official form, and it's a lot more detailed than what we do in the GitHub repo.
Cool, and you're alluding to this too, and I want to make sure that our listeners understand this. That in the past, you always see something like PMP is like, let's go build a bunch of stuff and then let's package it up and ship it. Project's done. This is not a done project.
No, this is an
live
agile
project.
right.
It's live contributions by Microsoft,
by
the community. Monthly or every couple month drops with like updates from doing change logs.
So we've gone to a monthly drop now. So there's basically a branch where they have a working copy, and then Vessa and the team decide which things get into that monthly drop based on them having a review and approving it.
Gotcha.
And that's working really, really well. The core libraries are actually going to be more iterative than that. So the NuGet packages will update as and when they're needed, which is great. So if you're in Visual Studio, you'll get the notification, you update it, and go from there.
Cool. Cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So there's a lot of work, and they're dedicated to that. So Vesa owns PMP now,
right.
And they're full time on that stuff, working with these customers on transforming them over, and all the lessons learned are going straight back into PMP and straight back into that MSD and guidance.
Awesome. Yes. Okay. So we talked about the podcast, how people can kind of get more information about what's going on, and you're talking to some of the engineers. We've talked about PMP guidance, which is out there for them to go grab a bunch of samples and everything. Let's pivot a bit, and let me ask you a little bit about like some training opportunities. So people want to go find more information about how do I work with some of this stuff, specifically like the Office 365 APIs. How do I learn more about how to use those, or how do I learn more about workflow or the REST API or CSOM? You guys are doing a lot of work. Again, it's also found in GitHub, but it's also surfaced on dev.office.com. Microsoft has something called the Virtual Academy, and you're doing a bunch of content in that area too, right?
Yeah, so when I joined, to be honest, I hadn't heard of MicrosoftVirtualAcademy.com when I joined, and CJ was like, look, we're going to get some stuff up on here, and this is your first kind of task. Hit road running, go. Yeah. And we didn't have a syllabus. We didn't know what we were going to do. And so my first job was to really round up, okay, what have we got? What are we missing? And I just built out essentially 8 courses. And right now we've shipped 30 hours of training as 30 modules. But the neat bit is you can go and watch the training on demand on MicrosoftVirtualAcademy.com. You can find all this on dev.office.com/training. Mm-hmm. But once you've watched the video, there's an assessment set of questions there that you can take directly within the Microsoft Virtual Academy interface. But in addition to that, all of the demos, all of the code samples that we show, the slide decks, all available for you to download from GitHub, which we link to in dev.office.com. And in addition to that, we have labs. So we've actually done the labs as markdown files. The reason we've done that is we know that we're in this new agile world where we can't write training once and then wait 3 years for the next version of SharePoint to come out to bother changing it. You know that from working for a training company. Yeah. And so markdown files was a way that, well, actually, if the community see that the lab's not right, or maybe a lab needs a little bit more information, they were struggling on it, technically they can fork that repo, they can make that addition to the markdown file for the lab, and then submit that as a pull request. I'll go through it and review it and approve that commit through. And so we're working in this very open world now from that training perspective. And the hands-on labs are really good. They usually take about, I guess, half an hour to run through. And I think, depending on your learning style, some people can just watch a video and they're done. Mm-hmm. Other people like following step-by-step instructions to, start from a blank Visual Studio project and go through. So that's all available now for the app model stuff inside SharePoint and the app model within Office, and obviously all the new APIs that we RTM'd, which CJ talked about in a previous show, right. Which we announced at TechEd. But I think the other side of the skilling up aspect is that you've got the on-demand training, you've got the hands-on labs, we've done some really cool work with our documentation. So historically, and I'll openly admit, because I've been very critical of it in the past, the doc has been terrible. Yeah. You go and try and find a definition of an endpoint, and it just doesn't exist. Yep. And you end up binging or Googling, and then you end up finding your own bloody blog article that shows you what that endpoint was meant to do, right? You're like,
been there, done that.
Oh my God.
Frustrating.
Yeah, there should be a $1 jar for that one too. And so this time around, full credits to the documentation team. They've done a great job of getting that coverage of these new APIs that we've shipped. But the really cool part is it's interactive. So that in every, like the Mail API or the Calendar API, where we show the endpoints for the HTTP calls, you actually have a try button there where you can click on it and it'll actually show you a live response from a server we've got running in the back end of what that JSON would look like. And also all the parameters. So I can go in there and change red drafts or whatever to inbox and click try again, and it will show you what that sample would look like from their inbox. So that's one other learning experience in terms of skilling up. But then in addition to the inline interactive documentation, we also have the API sandbox. And the API sandbox allows you it's basically a derivative of Napa, which we shipped with SharePoint 2013, where it's a browser-based IDE. And essentially we have these pre-baked templates on the left-hand side for get calendar, get contacts, which you can click on, and it loads the browser at the top. But then if you run it, it'll actually show you what the output would be if you run that code. Gotcha. So it's very much like Plunked or JS Fiddle, but specifically around the sandbox of our APIs.
It's cool to be able to see the code that you see. It's nice to be able to see something where you can actually see the results that come back right away without you having to go through and write the code to see the response that comes back.
Yeah.
So that you can kind of see, if I do this, what kind of stuff am I going to get back?
Right,
If
right.
I'm working on a
Can
project.
can I get that start date and the end date just by making that simple call?
Yeah, how complex is this one? Am I getting the data back that I need for this one project? And I
Right.
can sit there and, without having to go through a bunch of prototyping and see, does this work? Effectively, you're doing a bunch of the prototyping with the APIs. I know the other stuff that I can do, but I'm like, what does this give me? What kind of capabilities does this give me?
Yeah.
That's a really cool addition. It'd be nice to see the rest of that kind of doc go around in Microsoft. I haven't seen another company do something like that before.
Yeah.
Is this a new thing?
So actually, funnily enough, the OneNote team, if you go to dev.onenote.com, they use a vendor called Apogee, and they do it with their APIs already.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, and so we looked at that, but we decided that we would do our own implementation of it because it would allow us to like have real-time data coming back from a real Office 365 tenant.
Yeah.
Whereas Apogee is kind of masking that. But it's the same concept. It's basically that sandbox where you can go and play with the APIs and chuck in your parameters and see what's going to come back, and change from getting all of the content to getting just the minimal amount of response to from a JSON kind of light aspect, and so that's really cool that now developers have got different ways that they can kind of ramp up on these skills. And I think so in addition to all that, the other thing that I'm kind of ramping up on is whenever we're at a conference, if I do a demo, if Sonia does a demo, if CJ does a demo, immediately those things are up on GitHub.
Yeah. That's cool.
And so, when we show stuff, you've not got to be like taking photos with your camera, or us saying, oh yeah, we'll put it up somewhere later on, and 6 months later it appears on the MSDN code gallery or whatnot. We're actually genuinely just we're building these projects up inside GitHub, and making them public for people to grab. So the research project tracker, which you helped us with, that's all available, and we've just added, funny enough, to that now. So it was an Angular JS app that we built, but we've just added another scenario where it was storing data inside SharePoint lists. But now we've built an iOS and Android application that uses the new SDKs to call and access those SharePoint list data.
Yeah.
We've shipped all that open source this week as well. So there's a lot of work that, it makes sense to have code snippets in our learning training on demand, or in our holes, or in the documentation. But seeing a fully fledged code sample that is almost something you could demo to your management and go, look, this is what you can do with the Office 365 APIs.
Yeah.
People get it and they can pull them, and we build it in a way that it'd be how you'd ship it.
Right.
So people can pull them apart, and like the Angular one, the research project tracker, you could rip out the views and the controllers specific to the research project tracker, and use that as a base for your own Angular app that uses SharePoint as a backend.
Yeah, I know when I was working with you on this, Scott Hilliard and I did this with you guys, and we wanted to make sure that it was going to be a good reference implementation to where, while the scenario of doing a research tracker or something may not fit what another company's doing, we made sure that we abstracted out, here's how the auth flow is going to work, and then here's how you go get your data, and here's the pattern you want to use. I mean, today, like, for example, you talked about it a little bit in your session. You've got today, there's an intermediate thing you have to call on the server side, because you can't make that direct call from the client to SharePoint and get the access token. It's just not a safe thing to do.
Right.
You could, but it's not a good practice to let that access token touch the client. So we created that intermediary that engineering signed off on, and we were all cool with. But then, down the road, if there's things coming that make it easier to where we don't have to go through and have that intermediary, we could always go in and update that application to pull that intermediary out and show how to do something like when we get core support or something, which you talked a little bit about in your session today too.
Yeah, and so like the core support for the APIs is coming next year, early next year actually. And what's really cool about that is that what we'll do is we'll take that sample and we'll just refactor it. So we'll remove the fact that it's calling that proxy web API to then call the Office 365 APIs, and just rip and replace that with the cores library.
And what'll be cool about that, if we do it, we can sit there and create a branch, pull that stuff out, merge it back in, and any developer can go in and say, well, I'm at this point now where I'm using that intermediary. How do I go about doing it? And they can see exactly how we did it, all because of the commits and the source control and everything.
Yeah. So we're really trying to use the same tools that devs are using and being very transparent with the way we work. And with a lot of these samples, we're seeing a lot of the community kind of go, oh, that research project tracker's cool. I'm going to build a Xamarin app that works with that, and then I'm going to fork the repo and submit that as a pull request. So there's a bunch of stuff that the community are kind of adding on top of these scenarios now, which was always the intention, and we weren't sure how much traction we were going to get. But we're actually seeing a lot of traction there where people are helping to kind of flesh out the samples we build for keynotes and stuff, which, as a community guy, if I'm on stage at a keynote demonstrating a component of that sample that you've built, I mean, that's going to be a really good testament to the work you're doing.
It really is. The other thing that's really neat about it, I'm with you. I saw you guys started using GitHub, and I was really curious specifically around the Office developer side. Azure side, I know, and then .NET, they've done it. They've got their own pull requests that things are happening over there on the open source side. There's other groups at Microsoft that are using GitHub, but OfficeDev is traditionally a enterprise level thing. And so you have enterprise devs who are not traditionally doing open source style development. They're usually, everything is, protect the code, don't let it get out. We're not really contributing openly to these different things. It was really cool to see a lot of these people take Office developers, take stuff that you guys have done, and they've extended it. The way that GitHub facilitates that, making it so easy to see what people have taken this project and what they've changed and how many changes they've done and go navigate through it. It's one of those things, let's put the geek hat and the propeller hat on just for a second. I get lost sometimes going in, looking at another project, seeing what other people have done. I'm following a project and see their changes that they haven't pushed back to the main one because it doesn't make sense for everyone, but you see what they've done and it's like, that's really cool. Yeah, you could go jump over and go grab theirs instead of grabbing the Microsoft one. Yeah. It's really cool.
And then in addition to that, and this is credit to the content publishing team, they're doing the same thing. So the documentation for a long time, I've tried to add comments on the MSDN pages, and this is wrong, your code sample is actually wrong, your snippet's wrong. Yeah. And the comment sits there for like 2 years without being fixed, right? Because there's thousands of pages and the guys can't keep up. Yeah. And so we're actually moving to this open source model with the documentation as well, where if you see a mistake, actually like we did this week, which you pointed out when you were doing some stuff, we'll be able to go in and edit that and submit it, and then it will go for an approval process, and it'll actually change there in MSDN without kind of this ad hoc discussion happening in Yammer or maybe via an email thread. Yeah. And you'll get credited for those changes.
Yeah, you're doing it with a poll. If you do the same thing with GitHub, so are you talking like you're moving like the OfficeDev documentation to GitHub like Azure does?
No, so there's a new open source CMS that's an open authoring experience that's coming for the MSDN Doco. Oh, cool. And that's across all of MSDN. So the Office 365 dev team that I work with in content publishing is using that. Oh, cool. But in addition to that, like the OpenXML SDK stuff, the documentation for that is all in Markdown, and that's being constantly updated as well. So there's different ways that we're working with it. But what's been really impressive with the content publishing team is Andrew Byrne heads up this group. He's got a bunch of guys that are just, all they're doing is working on building out reference starter projects. And so they've already shipped a Universal Windows app, they've shipped an ASP.NBC app, and they just this week shipped the Android version of that app. And essentially what it is you download the source, you F5 it, or you open it up in Eclipse and click the run button. That's my expertise in Android right there. Yeah, I'm having to learn that just to demo it. And I showed Xcode today. I showed that demo running as well.
2 times. Yeah, I was Xcode on 2 Macs, 2 Microsoft presenters this week on Macs, presenting from OS X. And using Xcode. That's new times.
And actually, the Xcode version of this starter project thing's coming. The team are working on that right now. But the nice bit is you can just run those samples up, and there's a bunch of buttons. You click on calendar, it goes to a new view with create, update, edit, delete, and then you can click on all those buttons. But the nice bit is you can just add breakpoints in the code, and you can see the code that's running. So really, what it does is it unblocks this whole nonsense of what's the CRUD for this API? Like, how easy is it for me just to go into that sample, grab the create event, bits of script and chuck that in my own project. So these starter projects I think are the most useful because they are very concise. So the code samples that I'm kind of working on are more like they're the keynote-y type things that show something end to end. These starter projects are really about, what is the CRUD for that? If I want to do paging on get me all the calendar items, what does the paging calls look like? And so those starter projects are really, really useful. And again, all of those are available at dev.office.com/code-samples. That's cool. And we'll just keep growing and improving those things in that way.
And I mean, for the community that's involved and that's interested in getting involved in this kind of stuff, I know that there's a desire by a lot of people to become a Microsoft MVP for different things. And now they've seen that where we have like the open source contributions to the documentation and everything used to be measured on blogs and on books and speaking at user groups and stuff like that. And some people just don't want that outgoing kind of thing, and some people are just going to be a dev and they say, I want to help. I'm doing this stuff and I can help in my business, in my day-to-day job. Yeah, they can go through and make those changes. Those things are now seen as metrics when they go through and evaluate people that are being nominated for an MVP. So you can be a pure open source guy, do no blogging, do no speaking, do no writing, except for just going through and helping contribute to that and become an MVP that way.
Yeah, and then we're doing a lot more in the visibility aspect as well. Like for a long, long time when I used to run nothing but SharePoint.com and the SharePoint Dev Wiki, I'd always celebrate other bloggers, and to detriment of my girlfriend, with Feedly.com, I've got like about 1,500 feeds that I subscribe to, and I find it really interesting just to go through and see what people are blogging about. And if anything's worthwhile, I add it to my buffer queue, which means it goes onto Twitter, LinkedIn, my Facebook page, and I'll get to that in a moment. And it goes onto the Yammer group where we share all the dev links, and it's caught on. Like other people now are sharing their links they discover in the Yammer group called Office 365 Dev Links in Office 365 Technical Network.
Oh, cool! I didn't know that.
Yeah, so other people now, and I was like, wow, I didn't know about this guy, and so now I've added him to my Feedly. So that group's really cool. If you're a blogger out there and you don't see me tweeting your stuff, just ping me and let me know, and I'll add you to my feeds. But what we
As
do,
you call a lot of that on your podcast,
and
you
then
say
on
a
the
big
yeah,
thing,
that's right. And then the weekly update on the podcast, I call them out. But also, you end up on the homepage of dev.office.com. We have a section there where we do like, here are the most recent blogs from MVPs and community guys. So we're really trying to celebrate the awareness of, the community is really active with Office, and they don't mind sharing. And I guess in general, the Microsoft ecosystem seems to be like that. I've been in other ecosystems in the past where people kind of see knowledge as power and they protect it and they don't like sharing it. Whereas this ecosystem is really cool. Mm-hmm. And so we're trying to do everything we can in our power to like get out there and make sure people are aware of it. So my Twitter, at JThake, so JTHAKE. A as in Apple, not as in Echo. I don't know why people think I'm saying E or I, but I guess that's the accent thing, right?
Yeah, we'll have all your contact info, your blog, all that stuff. We'll put that in the show notes so people want to find out how to find you and stuff. And we'll put the podcast in there. We'll put links into the NVA stuff, to the training content, and also into the PMP stuff. I'll put all that stuff in here. But it's funny because what you're saying, like the whole knowledge is power thing, and people trying to hold on to it. I had that model in my head for years, for the longest time. And it's just over the last couple of years, you just see that so many people are so open with the stuff, so much open source stuff going on, that it's just like, I finally took the attitude of like, you can try to protect this stuff, but you're not doing anything that's super innovative. Somebody else is going to do it as well. So if you get a better vibe, instead of being the guy that people come to the conference to come see you say something and being like, oh, he's the only one that knows this and he said it and I got to be there. It resonates better with the community if you're more open about that stuff. And people just saying he's just contributing. He's more of a thought leader in those things and help those things. You get, I think, better reputation points or whatever.
Yeah, I think also it's the connecting with the peers, right? Like the more people you know that are talking about different bits and pieces, I can associate with them and I'll reach out to them, and you connect these really strong bonds. So when you come to these conferences, or when everyone was at the summit last week in Redmond, the MVP summit, it was great to catch up with people that I hadn't seen in a while. That I read your blog, you're on it. You're posting like every other week, like really quality content. Like, where are you getting time to do this for a start? Like, does your boss know you're doing this? But it's great, and I think that part of it. There's definitely a social aspect to it, and to be honest, I wouldn't be where I am now without doing that. So,
true, me too.
And so I just like to help other people in the same way and make sure that they're getting that visibility they deserve by what they're writing.
You kind of feel like a bit of and wants to feel a bit of an obligation, but it's just like I could take the time to try and write this myself, but it's better to just be like, nah, you guys. Everyone else, let me just show you what this other guy did. This is awesome.
Yeah. So that's cool. And I will jump on the face just for a bit of fun. So Facebook is one of those things where he's like, who do you add? So I'm going to ask a question to you. Like,
oh, goodness.
Right. So the Facebook thing, it's always been a bit, people can add me on Twitter. They can follow me on Twitter, and then people will jump to me in a conference and be like, oh, hey, Jeremy, how you going? I see when it's the Formula One. Did you have a great time? I was like, how did you know? Oh, that's right. I tweeted that I was at the Formula One. But with Facebook, it's a little bit different because that's more personal. That's my family are at. So what are your rules for adding someone on Facebook?
That's funny. That's a good thing. Yeah. So I have my social terms of service, and I'll admit that I have to go back and I have to clean this up, especially on Facebook. But so just kind of like go down the chain. So first, I'll come to Facebook last because that's a more complicated answer. For Twitter, I follow people if I'm interested in following on it, but what I post on Twitter is stream of conscious. So you're going to get work stuff, you're going to get personal stuff, you're going to get not personal stuff, but you're going to get like if I'm sitting there complaining about my football team, if you're sitting there trying to follow me because I'm talking about office development or SharePoint or something like that, you're going to get a hell of a lot more if you follow me on Twitter. So that's just stream of conscious stuff. LinkedIn, I'm not the LinkedIn go connect to every single person I come in contact with. I don't like the collecting contacts because I think that kind of diminishes what the purpose of the whole thing is.
Yeah.
If someone comes to me and say, hey, I see you're connected to this guy, can you introduce them? I wouldn't do that to some random guy. So if that doesn't make sense. If I can't do that to some random person, I shouldn't be connect to you on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So it's somebody I associate with professionally. With Facebook, first and foremost, Facebook is a personal thing, right? To me, it's not so much of a work thing. So the people that I add on Facebook,
are only people that I have like a personal interaction with.
Yeah.
It may be personal interaction with people at work that I work with. Like I know you and I, I was going to say we have a personal relationship, but I'll make sure we get very clear that even though we went to the F1, we were all in the same place, but it's not like that. But it was, we hang out outside of work, and we also, as like just friends, and then we have like the work side too. And we're friends on Facebook. I do that. But like if I present at a conference and some people watch me present, they find me on Facebook, they go start trying to add me. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to accept it. And it's nothing against you. It's just that we don't have a connection. There's no connection other than you know my name and we maybe talked one time. There's not something that I really, it sounds so crass, but I'm not really interested in what's going on day to day in your life.
Yeah.
Right? And the more people you add, the more things you miss of what your friends are doing. So, I mean, I went through and every once in a while you kind of fall into that gap where it's like going friend. And I need to go back and just kind of go like unfriend.
Well, because the only thing is when you do add friend, then you start seeing all their crap too, right?
Exactly,
It's like, I don't really care about what he's doing because I don't even know who he is.
Yeah, exactly. And
Right.
it's nothing against those people, but it's random stuff that it's like Facebook is a personal thing for me to share personal stuff. I don't generally share too much work stuff on there.
No, I've stopped doing that. I got told off by my nan. She's like, "What's this SharePoint stuff?"
Yeah.
And she's like, "I don't get this." And my uncle was like, well, why are you posting that? Like, we don't care. So I've kind of moved my work stuff to Twitter and LinkedIn.
Yeah, so that's what I do too.
Or Facebook. I actually have a Facebook page. I have, just like Justin Bieber.
Yeah.
I have a Facebook page, and that's where I suggest people like me there.
Yeah, follow the work stuff.
If they want work stuff, they do the page.
Yeah.
But if they're my friend, then I add me directly.
That's the way I kind of look at it. The one thing I wish that people would not take is that when I don't accept a friend request, some people take it personally.
Yeah.
And then when you go and unfriend someone, people can take that person. Like I unfriended someone just recently, and they got pretty pissed off about it. The guy was in my class one time. He got pretty pissed off about it. He's like, "Why'd you unfriend me?" He sent me a thing on Twitter. And I was like, "It's nothing against you. It's that you're from another country. You speak a totally different language than I speak. I don't recognize it. And all your posts are in a different language." I'm not going to say what language it is. I don't want to all of a sudden lose like a French contingent or my Spanish contingent of the podcast. But I don't know French or I don't know Spanish. And so I don't really want to see those in my feed because it's just something else for me to scroll past. I don't need that. I already got enough ads I got to scroll past.
So who do you let on your Snapchat?
I don't know.
Just your wife?
Do I have Snapchat? I don't even know what's... Nobody. So that's the funny one. It's like you have some of those social networks and you get these emails like going, "Hey, this person followed you on SlideShare." I'm like, "Why? There's nothing on my account." I have no idea why you did that. That was a complete waste.
I think the one with me is LinkedIn. You're such and such said you're an expert in blah, and I'm like, how are they any judge of whether I'm an expert in SQL Server 2010? Like,
I got the same
guy
thing.
just clicked the bloody button on the top of the page when he hit the LinkedIn homepage. Expertise is done on LinkedIn.
I'm not a big fan of that, but anyway.
But my rule with Facebook, which is different to the other networks where I just kind of free for all, is I must want to have a drink with that person to add them as a Facebook friend.
That's a good
So
rule.
I'd want to be in the situation where I'm at a bar and I sit and chat to them and have a beer.
Yeah.
Now, Seb Matthews from the UK takes it a bit further. His rule is you must have bought him a drink for him to have added you as a Facebook friend. I figured that was taking it a little bit too far.
It's a little bit too far. I would take it a little bit farther than saying, I want to have had sit down and have a drink with you, and then I would have wanted to do it again. And that's like we have not a relationship, but there's something there. So
Yeah.
Well, cool. Hey, man, thanks for taking the time to sit down and talk about all this stuff. I know a lot of people are going to be very interested in the stuff that's coming out of you guys' team. You guys are doing a phenomenal job. I just give you kudos. Personally, I give you kudos for switching from being outside Microsoft and being with a bunch of MVPs where we all have, there's sometimes an adversarial relationship between Microsoft and MVPs. You've done a really good job going to be Microsoft, speaking on behalf of Microsoft, still maintaining your independence of the whole thing, but you've got a job and it's what you're supposed to do, and that's you need to represent what they're doing, but then still maintaining a really good advocacy kind of relationship with the rest of the MVP. So it's been really cool to see like you go in there and how the whole thing has gone, how the community's respected it and stuff, and not like he's gone corporate and that kind of stuff.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, there's some definite role models there, like Scott Hanselman is a definite example of the guy that isn't afraid to call it out if it's not right, and so there's that line. I think Microsoft so far have let me do that, and I think CJ and Sonia are the same. So our team as a whole that's just the approach we're taking to it. The minute I start doing call aid and talking out of my ass, then you guys are going to kick me anyway. But it's part of the process, right?
Yeah, I mean, and there's parts where it's just like you ask a question, it's like, I can't tell you that, and it's like, yeah, I get that. I mean, of course, you got close friendships with people. Like, we're close friends, and some people are like going, "Oh, I'm sure you know what's coming next." I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to ask that question. I don't. That's not fair to you to put you in that kind of a position. And it's just like, no.
It's a lot easier now. We're a lot more open. Like the roadmap's there. The fact we're talking about core support when it's not even shipped yet is huge, right?
That's so in the Microsoft Graph. I mean, that stuff is like pre-production. So pre-production is like, really? That's like that looks like a build announcement. That doesn't look like a.
So for that, if you want to see what like the stuff we showed a bit of leg is a term that we used on stage, which got a few eyebrows raised. But if you go to dev.office.com/training, the first block on that page is the Office 365 Dev Kickoff, which was from Tech Ed. Myself and Brian Jones, who's the group program manager there, we demoed. We did like 15 demos.
That was ridiculous. Yeah.
But the last 5 demos was all like new stuff that's not out, running on like pre-prod bits, and it's been really exciting to this change of showing it rather than waiting till it's all shit before we talk about it.
Yeah, well, and cool seeing how fast things are getting addressed and implemented in the platform.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to want it to be on-prem because you could do fully trusted code and everything, and then I started liking more app model stuff and kept dismissing 365. I have no interest to do any on-prem stuff because all the new stuff and the cool stuff, while you guys have said it for a while, it's really true that the innovation happens in 365, and if you want it on-prem, you've got to wait till vNext, potentially, right? At worst case, or
some CUs. There's been some API updates through CUs and service packs. But in general, we're always going to innovate in the cloud first, and then the on-premises stuff will get a subset of that stuff back. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, hey, man, thanks a lot for taking the time here.
Yeah, you're welcome, man.
Where can people find you?
At jthake on Twitter.
Yeah.
JeremyThake.com on my blog, and I still blog there. I've just done an opinion piece actually on my own personal impression of what we launched at Tech Ed, and I think people were quite surprised by that. They're like, why are you doing this? Like, you've got your own channels now on blogs.office.com. And I was like, no, I still want to give my own opinions, like from the inside. Like, I don't see a problem with that.
It was really cool to see you do that. I was happy to see that because it was it's nice to kind of get your 2 cents on something like that. Yeah.
And as I go forward, I'll blog a bit more about like my learning experiences at Microsoft and things that have been like the old moments of what have I done, and then the moments where it's like, this is really cool and I'm really glad I did it.
Or a switching of different hardware and stuff.
Yeah, that's right. So switching back to the iPhone 6 and the comments about the MacBook Pro in the session, it's like, well, I'm running Xcode and Android Studio. Like, what else am I going to run on?
Don't have a choice. They're not cross-platform.
Yeah.
So, well, cool, man. Thanks a lot. And we'll go ahead.
You're welcome. And I love the show as well. And you know what? I love it so much that I laugh at myself when I drive into work because I'm like, I listen to you and CJ, who's my boss.
Yeah.
And then I get to work and CJ's there, and it's like there's only so much of CJ that I really need in my life. But the podcast is that good that I persist with it and listen through. So it's good.
We try to be really lighthearted and everything, and try and have fun with it too. So
it's a great way of keeping up with all the news as well.
At first we were talking about it. About how how are we going to keep up with the different content and everything? Are we going to have enough content to talk about? And it's just like with the Azure news. I mean, I keep everything in an Evernote notebook that CJ and I share. And when new stuff comes out, if you see it on Twitter, you see a blog post, you see an email come in, I just forward it to Evernote, and then I drop it in, and we don't tag it. And the stuff that's not tagged,
is the stuff you can talk about.
Yeah, it's the candidate for the next show.
Yeah.
And like we recorded an episode yesterday morning. He's in Amsterdam. I'm over here. I was doing the recording at 7 a.m. my time. He was 1 p.m. his time. We started going through a bunch of Azure news here. I think we got to like 50 minutes, and we both are just sitting there on Skype, look at each other going, we got to stop. And we got enough stuff that we've talked about here. We got to go to the next one. So I've got like a ton of stuff that's still coming, and it's like we're supposed to be talking about the news, and it's like a month old by the time we get to it because freaking Azure ships 50 things every Tuesday, it seems.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm not in that TPM org, that's for sure.
Well, man, it's a crazy, it's cool, the speed of
worlds
innovation.
Are colliding, though.
Yeah.
All this API stuff I'm talking about, it's all to do with Azure Active Directory, so I'm having to get full bottle on all that stuff now.
That's what's cool. So I think you talked about that a little bit. We've closed the show off like 2 or 3 times now, I think. But you talked about that in your session. I don't know if the attendees really picked up on it, but the shift of apps not so much being Office 365 apps, but being Azure apps that have rights to get into Office 365.
Yeah.
That's really freaking important and
really
powerful.
And then we add additional services like through Dynamics and Azure endpoints in there and all your kind of the consumer stuff, and that it's just really compelling to have like a whole services endpoint, and that's really where that Microsoft graph comes in.
Wait till we see like
Xbox Live, like sitting
Oh,
there.
yeah,
I think that's
totally.
going to be
Yeah.
that kind of stuff is going to be super cool.
Yeah, so I'm really excited with where Satch's taken the company, and I guess for me, like I started the week after he did.
Yeah.
And so I've really only ever witnessed the change.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting to see how people that have been in Microsoft for a long time, you walk in their rooms, they have these big crystals of 15 and 20 years,
Yeah.
but they're evolving as well. So it's really exciting to see all that happen.
It is. Watching the announcements that happened last week, I think was the one to me when they talked about open sourcing of
Yeah.
.NET. That one was the one that just hit the huge hammer right down, just
Yeah.
like going.
I'm
now you
slowly
see.
getting through those videos. I actually watched.
I haven't gotten a single one.
Brian Harry's one where he talked about all the new ALM story with Visual Studio Online. My
Yeah.
mind was blown by some of the stuff they're doing there.
So you're the fifth person that's told me that. I've
Yeah.
yet to go grab those.
And I've got to watch Scott Hanselman's one where he did it on VNext ASP.NET. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, again, it's just like, well, I've got big plane journeys to go, and we'll catch up that way.
It left me with one thing wanting. You don't have to comment on this because somebody already nailed you about it in your session today.
Oh, don't even ask it.
Well, I know. I had some good feedback from one person at Microsoft, but just when do I get Visual Studio native on OS X? That's it. We'll wrap the show with that one.
No comment.
Cool. Thanks so much.
That's good feedback.
Well, we can always aim for the North Star. So thanks a lot, man. I appreciate
No,
it.
you're welcome, mate. Cheers.
If you have a question for us, go to microsoftcloudshow.com/questions, where you can submit it as text or record it as a WAV or an MP3 file and provide a link so that we can play your question on the show. Our theme music is an excerpt from Evaporated Eric by Monk Turner used under Creative Commons. You can subscribe to us in iTunes by searching for the Microsoft Cloud Show or via RSS at microsoftcloudshow.com, where you'll also find a full transcript and show notes of each episode. You can find us on Facebook searching for the Microsoft Cloud Show or on Twitter at MS Cloud Show. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.